Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue our reading in Zane Gray's The Desert of Wheat, Chapter 7. Outwardly, she did not seem to change at all. She felt her father's eyes upon her, but she had no wish to hide the tumult of her heart. The moment made her a woman. Where was the fulfillment of those vague, stingingly sweet, dreamy fancies of love? Where was her maiden reserve that she so boldly recognized an unsolicited passion? Her eyes met Dorn's steadily, and she felt some vital and compelling spirit pass from her to him. She saw him struggle with what he could not understand. It was his glance that wavered and fell, his hand that trembled, his breast that heaved. She loved him. There had been no beginning. Always he had lived in her dreams. And like her brother, he was going to kill and to be killed. Then Lenore gazed away across the wheat fields. The shadows came waving toward her. A stronger breeze fanned her cheeks. The heavens were darkening, and a low thunder rolled along the battlements of the great clouds. "Say, Kurt, what do you make of this?" asked Anderson. Lenore, turning, saw her father hold out the little gray cake that Jake had found in the wheat field. Young Dorn seized it quickly, felt and smelled and bit it. "Where'd you get this?" he asked with excitement. Anderson related the circumstance of its discovery. "It's a preparation, mostly phosphorus," replied Dorn. "When the moisture evaporates, it will ignite, set fire to any dry substance. That is a trick of the IWW to burn the wheat fields." "By all that," swore Anderson with his jaw bulging. "Jake and I knew it meant bad, but we didn't know that." "I've been expecting tricks of all kinds," said Dorn. "I have 4 men watching the section." "Good! Say, that car turned off to the right back there some miles. But worse luck, the IWWs can work at night." "We'll watch at night too," replied Dorn. Lenore was conscious of anger encroaching upon the melancholy splendor of her emotions, and the change was bitter. "When the rain comes, won't it counteract the ignition of that phosphorus?" she asked eagerly, for she knew that rain would come. "Only for the time being. It'll be just as dry this time tomorrow as it is now." "Then the wheat's gonna burn," declared Anderson grimly. "If that trick has been worked all over this country, you're going to have it worse than a prairie fire. The job on hand is to save this one section that has a fortune tied up in it." "Mr. Anderson, that job looks almost hopeless. In the light of this phosphorus trick, what on earth can be done? I've 4 men. I can't hire any more because I can't trust these strangers. And how can 4 men, or 5, counting me, watch a square mile of wheat day and night?" The situation looked hopeless to Lenore, and she was sick. What cruel fates toyed with this young farmer? He seemed to be sinking under this last crowning blow. There in the sky, rolling up and rumbling, was the long-deferred rainstorm that meant freedom from debt and a fortune besides. But of what avail the rain if it was to rush the wheat to full bursting measure only for the infernal touch of the foreigner? Anderson, however, was no longer a boy. He had dealt with many and many a trial. Never was he plunged into despair until after the dread crisis had come to pass. His red forehead, frowning and ridged with swelling blood vessels, showed the bent of his mind. "Oh, it is hard," said Lenore to Dorn. "I'm so sorry. But don't give up. While there's life, there's hope." He looked up with tears in his eyes. "Thank you. I did weaken. You see, I've let myself believe too much. Now, for Dad's sake, I don't care about the money for myself. Money, what good will money be to me now? It's over for me. To get the wheat cut, harvested, that's all I hoped. The army, war, France, I go to be... Hush, whispered Lenore, and she put a soft hand upon his lips, checking the end of that bitter speech. She felt him start, and the look she met pierced her soul. Hush, it's gonna rain. Father will find some way to save the wheat, and you are coming home after the war. He crushed her hand to his hot lips. You make me ashamed. I won't give up, he said brokenly. And when I'm over there in the trenches, I'll think... Don't listen to this, rang out Anderson. We'll fool that IWW gang. It's a-going to rain. So far, so good. Tomorrow, you take this cake of phosphorus and ride around all over the country. Show it and tell the farmers their wheat's going to burn. And offer them whose fields are already ruined. That fire can't do no more harm. Offer them big money to help you save your section. 100 men could put out a fire if one did start. And these neighbors of yours, some of them will jump at a chance to beat the IWW. Boy, it can be done. He ended with a big fist held aloft in triumph. See, didn't I tell you, murmured Lenore softly. It touched her deeply to see Dorn respond to hope. His haggard face suddenly warmed and glowed. I never thought of that, he burst out radiantly. We can save the wheat, Mr. Anderson. I can't thank you enough. Don't try, replied the rancher. I tell you it will rain, cried Lenore gaily. Let's walk out there, watch the storm come across the hills. I love to see the shadows blow over the wheat. Lenore became aware as she passed the car that Nash was glaring at her in no unmistakable manner. She had forgotten all about him. The sight of his jealous face somehow added to her strange exhilaration. They crossed the road from the house, and facing the west, had free prospect of the miles of billowy hills and the magnificent ordnance of the storm clouds. The deep, low mutterings of thunder seemed a grand and welcome music. Lenore stole a look at Dorn to see him, bareheaded, face upturned, entranced. It was only a rainstorm coming. Down in the valley country, such storms were frequent at this season, too common for their meaning to be appreciated. Here in the desert of wheat, rain was a blessing, life itself. The creamy white, rounded edge of the approaching clouds came and coalesced, spread, and mushroomed. Under them, the body of the storm was purple, lit now and then by a flash of lightning. Long, drifting veils of rain, gray as thin fog, hung suspended between sky and earth. Listen, exclaimed Dorn. A warm wind, laden with dry scent of wheat, struck Lenore's face and waved her hair. It brought a silken, sweeping rustle, a whispering of the bearded grain. The soft sound thrilled Lenore. It seemed a sweet, hopeful message that waiting had been rewarded, that the drought could be broken. Again, and more beautiful than ever before in her life, she saw the waves of shadow as it came forward over the wheat. Rippling like breezes over the surface of a golden lake, they came in long, broken lines, moving, following, changing, until the whole wheat field seemed in shadowy motion. The cloud pageant rolled on above and beyond. Lenore felt a sweet drop of rain splash upon her upturned face. It seemed like a caress. There came a pattering around her. Suddenly rose a damp, faint smell of dust. Beyond the hill showed a gray pall of rain coming slowly, charged with a low roar. The whisper of the sweeping wheat was swallowed up. Lenore stood her ground until heavy raindrops fell thick and fast upon her, sinking through her thin waist to thrill her flesh, and then with a last gay call to those two-man lovers of wheat and storms, she ran for the porch. There they joined her, Anderson puffing and smiling, Dorn still with that rapt look upon his face. The rain swept up and roared on the roof, while all around was streaked gray. "Boy, there's your $30,000 range," shouted Anderson. But Dorn did not hear. Once he smiled at Lenore as if she were the good fairy who had brought about this miracle. In his look, Lenore had deeper realization of him, of nature, and of life. She loved rain, but always thenceforth she would reverence it. Fresh, cool fragrance of a renewed soil filled the air. All that dusty gray hue of the earth had vanished, and it was wet and green and bright. Even as she gazed, the water seemed to sink in as it fell, a precious relief to thirsty soil. The thunder rolled away eastward and the storm passed. The thin clouds following soon cleared away from the western sky, rain-washed and blue, with a rainbow curving down to bury its exquisite hues in the golden wheat. Chapter 8. The journey homeward held many incalculable differences from the uncertain doubts and fears that had tormented Lenore on the outward trip. For a long time she felt the warm, tight clasp of Dorn's hand on hers as he had said goodbye. Very evidently he believed that was to be his last sight of her. Lenore would never forget the gaze that seemed to try to burn her image on his memory forever. She felt that they would meet again. Solemn thoughts revolved in her mind. Still, she was not unhappy. She had given much unsought, but the return to her seemed growing every moment that she lived. The dust had been settled by the rain for many miles. However, beyond Palmer there began to show evidences that the storm had thinned out or sheared off because the road gradually grew dry again. When dust rose once more, Lenore covered her face. Although obsessed as she was by the deep change in herself, neither dust nor heat nor distance affected her greatly. Like the miles and moments sped by, she was aware through closed eyes when darkness fell. Stops were frequent after the Copper River had been crossed, and her father appeared to meet and question many persons in the towns they passed. Most of his questioning pertained to the IWW, and even excited whispering by her father and Jake had no power to interest her. It was midnight when they reached Many Waters, and Lenore became conscious of fatigue. Nash crowded in front of Jake as she was about to step out and assisted her. He gave her arm a hard squeeze and fiercely whispered in her ear, "Tomorrow." The whisper was trenchant with meaning and thoroughly aroused Lenore, but she gave no sign and moved away. "I seen strangers sneaking off in the dark," Jake was whispering to Anderson. "Keep your eyes peeled," replied Anderson. "I'll take Lenore up to the house and come back." It was pitch black up the path through the grove, and Lenore had to cling to her father. Is there any danger?" she whispered. "We're looking for anything," replied Anderson slowly. "Will you be careful?" "Sure, lass. I'll take no foolish risks. I've got men watching the house and ranch. But I'd better have the cowboys down. There's Jake. He spots some prowling coyotes the minute we reach home." Anderson unlocked and opened the door. The hall was dark and quiet. He turned on the electric light. Lenore was detaching her veil. "You look pale," he said solicitously. "No wonder, that was a ride. But I'm glad we went. I saved Dorn's wheat." I'm glad too, Father. Good night." He bade her good night and went out, locking the door. Then his rapid footsteps died away. Wearily, Lenore climbed the stairs and went to her room. She was awakened from deep slumber by Kathleen, who pulled and tugged at her. "Lenore, I thought you was dead. Your eyes were shut so tight," declared the child. "Breakfast is waiting. And did you fetch me anything?" "Yes, a new sister," replied Lenore dreamily. Kathleen's eyes opened wide. "Where?" Lenore placed a hand over her heart. "Here." "Oh, you do look funny. Get up, Lenore. Did you hear the shooting last night? Instantly, Lenore sat up and stared. No. Was there any? You bet. But I don't know what it was all about. Lenore dispelled her dreamy state, and hurriedly dressing, she went down to breakfast. Her father and Rose were still at the table. "Hello, Big Eyes," was his greeting. And Rose, not to be outdone, chirped, "Hello, old sleepyhead." Lenore's reply lacked her usual spontaneity, and she felt if she did not explain the wideness of her eyes. Her father did not look as if anything worried him. It was a way of his, however, not to show stress or worry. Lenore ate in silence until Rose left the dining room, and then she asked her father if there had been shooting. "Sure," he replied with a broad smile. "Jake turned his guns loose on them prowling men last night. By George, you ought to have heard them run. One plumped into the gate and went clear over it to fall like a log. Another fell into the brook and made more racket than a drowning horse, but it was so dark we couldn't catch them." "Jake shot to frighten them?" inquired Lenore. "Not much. He stung one IWW, that's for sure. We heard a cry, and this morning we found some blood." "What do you suppose these night visitors wanted?" "No telling. Jake thinks one of them looked and walked like the man Nash has been meeting. Anyway, we're not taking much more chance on Nash. I reckon it's dangerous keeping him around. I'll have him drive me today over to Vale and then to Huntington. You can go along. That'll be your last chance to pump him. Have you found out anything?" Lenore told what had transpired between her and the driver. Anderson's face turned fiery red. "That ain't much help to us," he declared angrily. "But it shows him up. So his real name's Renke? Fine American name, I don't think. That man's a spy and a plotter. And before he's another day older, I'm going to corner him. It's a sure go I can't hold Jake in any longer." To Lenore was a further indication of her father's temper that when they went down to enter the car, he addressed Nash in cool, careless, easy speech. It made Lenore shiver. She had heard stories of her father's early career among hard men. Jake was there, dry, caustic, with keen, quiet eyes that any subtle, clever man would have feared. But Nash's thoughts seemed turned mostly inward. Lenore took the front seat in the car beside the driver. He showed unconscious response to that action. "Jake, aren't you coming?" she asked of the cowboy. "Well, I reckon it'd sure be dull for you without me. Nobody to talk to while your dad fools around. But I can't go. Me and the boys are going to hang some IWWs this morning, and I can't miss that fun." Jake drawled his speech and laughed lazily as he ended it. He was just boasting as usual, but his hawk-like eyes were on Nash, and it was certain that Nash turned pale. Lenore had no reply to make. Her father appeared to lose patience with Jake, but after a moment's hesitation decided not to voice it. Nash was not a good nor a careful driver under any circumstances, and this morning it was evident he did not have his mind on his business. There were bumps in the orchard road where the irrigation ditches crossed. "Say, you ought to be driving a hay wagon," called Anderson sarcastically. At Vale, he ordered the car stopped at the post office, and telling Lenore he might be detained a few moments, he went in. Nash followed and presently came back with a package of letters. Upon taking his seat in the car, he assorted the letters, one of which, a large, thick envelope, manifestly gave him excited gratification. He pocketed them and turned to Lenore. "Ah, I see you get letters from a woman," she said, pretending a poisoned sweetness of jealousy. "Certainly, I'm not married yet," he replied. "Lenore, last night—" "You will never be married to me while you write to other women. Let me see that letter. Let me read it. All of them." No, Lenore, not here. Don't speak so loud. Your father will be coming any minute. Lenore, he suspects me, and that cowboy knows things. I can't go back to the ranch. Oh, you must come. No, if you love me, you've got to run off with me today. Why the hurry? She appealed. It's getting hot for me. Oh, what do you mean by that? Why don't you explain to me? As long as you are so strange, so mysterious, how can I trust you? You asked me to run off with you, yet you don't put confidence in me. Nash grew pale and earnest, and his hand shook. But if I do confide in you, then will you come with me? He queried breathlessly. I'll not promise. Maybe what you have to tell will prove you don't care for me. It'll prove I do, he replied passionately. Then tell me. Lenore realized she could no longer play the part she had assumed. But Nash was so stirred by his own emotions, so carried along in a current, that he did not see the difference in her. Listen, I tell you it's getting hot for me, he whispered. I've been put here, close to Anderson, to find out things and to carry out orders. Lately I've neglected my job because I fell in love with you. He's your father. If I go on with plans and harm comes to him, I'll never get you. Is that clear? It certainly is, replied Lenore, and she felt a tightness at her throat. I'm no member of the IWW, he went on. Whatever that organization might have been last year, it's gone wild this year. There are interests that have used the IWW. I'm only an agent, and I'm not high up either. I see what the government will do to the IWW if the Northwest leaves any of it, but just now there's plots against a few big men like your father. He's to be ruined, his crops and ranches destroyed, and he's to be killed. It's because he's so well known and has so much influence that he was marked. I told you the IWW was being used to make trouble. They were being stirred up by agitators, bribed and driven, all for the purpose of making a great disorder in the Northwest. Germany, whispered Lenore. I can't say. The men are all over, and these men work in secret. There are American citizens in the Northwest, one right in this valley, who have plotted to ruin your father. Do you know who they are? No, I do not. You are for Germany, of course. I have been. My people are German. But I was born in the U.S., and if it suits me, I will be for America. If you come with me, I'll throw up this dirty job and advise Glidden to shift the plot from your father to some other man. So it's Glidden, exclaimed Lenore. Nash bit his lip, and for the first time looked at Lenore without thinking of himself, and surprise dawned in his eyes. Yes, Glidden. You saw him speak to me up in the bend, the first time your father went to see Dorn's wheat. Glidden's playing the IWW against itself. He means to drop out of this deal with big money. Now I'll save your father if you'll stick to me. Lenore could no longer restrain herself. This man was not even big in his wickedness. Lenore divined that his later words held no truth. Mr. Renke, you are a detestable coward, she said, with quivering scorn. I let you imagine. Oh, I can't speak of it. Oh, you fooled me, he ejaculated, his jaw falling in utter amaze. You were contemptibly easy. You better jump out of this car and run. My father will shoot you. You deceitful cat, he cried haltingly. His anger overcame astonishment. Anderson's big bulk loomed up behind Nash. Lenore gasped as she saw her father, for his eyes were upon her, and he recognized events. Say, Mr. Renke, the postmaster says you got letters here under different names, said Anderson bluntly. Yes, I get them for a friend, stammered the driver, as his face turned white. You lying German pup. I'll look over them letters. Anderson's big hand shot out to clutch Nash, holding him powerless, and with the other hand he searched Nash's inside coat pockets to tear forth a packet of letters. Then Anderson released him and stepped back. "Get out of that car," he thundered. Nash made a slow movement as if to comply. Then suddenly he threw on the power. The car jerked forward. Anderson leaped to get one hand on the car door, the other on Nash. He almost pulled the driver out of his seat, but Nash held on desperately, and the car, gaining momentum, dragged Anderson. He could not get his feet up on the running board, and suddenly he fell. Lenore screamed and tore frantically at the handle of the door. Nash struck her, jerked her back into the seat. She struggled until the car shot full speed ahead. Then it meant death for her to leap out. "Sit still or you'll kill yourself," shouted Nash hoarsely. Lenore fell back, almost fainting with the swift realization of what had happened. Chapter 9. Kurt Dorn had indeed no hope of ever seeing Lenore Anderson again, and he suffered a pain that seemed to leave his heart numb. Though Anderson's timely visit might turn out as providential as the saving rainstorm, the wheat waved and rustled as if with renewed and bursting life. The exquisite rainbow still shone, a beautiful promise in the sky, but Dorn could not be happy in that moment. This day Lenore Anderson had seemed a bewildering fulfillment of the sweetness he had imagined was latent in her. She had meant what was beyond him to understand. She had gently put a hand to his lips to check the bitter words, and he had dared to kiss her soft fingers. The thrill, the sweetness, the incomprehensible and perhaps imagined response of her pulse would never leave him. He watched the big car until it was out of sight. The afternoon was only half advanced, and there were numberless tasks to do. He decided he could think and plan while he worked. As he was about to turn away, he espied another automobile, this one coming from the opposite direction to that Anderson had taken. The sight of it reminded Dorn of the IWW trick of throwing phosphorus cakes into the wheat. He was suspicious of that car. It slowed down in front of the Dorn homestead, turned into the yard, and stopped near where Dorn stood. The dust had caked in layers upon it. Someone hailed him and asked if this was the Dorn farm. Kurt answered in the affirmative, whereupon a tall man wearing a long linen coat opened the car door to step out. In the car remained the driver and another man. "My name is Hall," announced the stranger with a pleasant manner. "I'm from Washington, D.C. I represent the government and am in the Northwest in the interest of the Conservation Commission. Your name has been recommended to me as one of the progressive young wheat growers of Bend, particularly that you are an American located in a country exceedingly important to the United States just now, a country where foreign-born people predominate." Kurt, somewhat startled and awed, managed to give a courteous greeting to his visitor and asked him into the house. But Mr. Hall preferred to sit outdoors on the porch. He threw off hat and coat, and, taking an easy chair, he produced some cigars. "Will you smoke?" he asked, offering one. Kurt declined with thanks. He was aware of this man's penetrating yet kindly scrutiny of him, and he had begun to wonder. This was no ordinary visitor. "Have you been drafted?" abruptly queried Mr. Hall. "Yes, sir. Mine was the first number," replied Kurt, with a little pride. "Do you want an exemption?" Swiftly came the second query. It shocked Dorn, then stung him. "No," he said forcibly. "Your father's sympathy is with Germany, I understand." "Well, sir, I don't know how you understand that, but it's true, to my regret and shame." "You want to fight?" went on the official. I hate the idea of war, but I guess I want to fight. Maybe that's because I'm feeling scrappy over these IWW tricks." "Dorn, the IWW is only one of the many phases of war that we must meet," returned Mr. Hall. and then for a moment he thoughtfully drew upon his cigar. "Young man, I like your talk, and I'll tell you a secret. My name's not Hall. Never mind my name. For you, it's Uncle Sam." Whereupon, with a winning and fascinating manner that seemed to Kurt at once intimate and flattering, he began to talk fluently of the meaning of his visit and of its cardinal importance. The government was looking far ahead, preparing for a tremendous and perhaps a lengthy war. The food of the country must be conserved. Wheat was one of the most vital things in the whole world, and the wheat of America was incalculably precious. Only the government knew how precious. If the war was short, a wheat famine would come afterward. If it was long, the famine would come before the war ended. But it was inevitable. The very outcome of the war itself depended upon wheat. The government expected a nationwide propaganda by the German interests, which would be carried on secretly and boldly in every conceivable way, to alienate the labor organizations, to bribe or menace the harvesters, to despoil crops, and particularly to put obstacles in the way of the raising and harvesting, the transporting and storing of wheat. It would take an army to protect the nation's grain. Dorn was earnestly besought by this official to compass his district, to find out who could be depended upon by the United States and who was antagonistic, to impress upon the minds of all his neighbors the exceeding need of greater and more persistent cultivation of wheat. "I accept. I'll do my best," replied Kurt grimly. "I'll be going some the next 2 weeks." "It's deplorable that most of the wheat in this section is a failure," said the official, "but we must make up for that next year."